The axe came down. What? Twice. Blood spread across the wooden floor, and Raskolnikov stood there breathing hard, waiting to feel what he thought he would feel: power, liberation, proof that he was extraordinary. But instead, in that moment, something broke inside him that would never be repaired. And what I discovered through writing his story, what I learned from watching guilt destroy a man from the inside, is that conscience is not a social construction you can reason away. It is woven into the fabric of human nature itself. And when you violate it, when you cross certain lines, you don't escape the consequences by having better arguments. You carry the weight forever, unless you find the one thing that can transform guilt into something else entirely. Let me tell you how I came to understand this. Not through philosophy books, not through abstract theories about morality, but through living it. Through standing before a firing squad and believing I would die for my revolutionary ideas. Through 4 years in Siberian prison watching men who had killed. Through creating Raskolnikov and discovering that his psychological torment was more real than any character I had ever written. Because guilt, real guilt, the kind that comes from violating your own deepest nature, this is not something you think your way past. This is something that either destroys you or transforms you. And there is no middle ground. Raskolnikov is a former university student. Brilliant. Poor. Living in a cramped room that feels more like a coffin than a home. And he develops a theory, a sophisticated philosophical argument that divides humanity into two categories. Ordinary people who must obey moral law. And extraordinary people who have the right to transgress, to step over boundaries, to commit acts that would be crimes for others but are justified when done in service of some greater purpose. And he convinces himself, through months of obsessive thinking, that he belongs to this second category. That he is like Napoleon. That he can commit murder and move forward without consequence because his superior nature places him above conventional morality. So he plans to kill an old pawnbroker, a woman he sees as worthless, a parasite who loans money at cruel rates to desperate people. And he tells himself that her death will be a service to humanity. That with her money he can finish his education, help his family, do great things. That one small evil will produce much greater good. And his reasoning is airtight. His logic is impeccable. His arguments would convince any rational person examining the situation from the outside. But what he doesn't understand, what his intelligence cannot grasp, is that human beings are not primarily rational creatures. And that some acts create consequences that exist below the level of logic, in a place where arguments have no power. He commits the murder. And immediately everything changes. But not in the way he expected. He thought he would feel powerful, liberated, confirmed in his extraordinary status. Instead he feels nothing. And then worse than nothing. A creeping sense of wrongness that starts in his gut and spreads through his entire being. And he cannot think, cannot eat, cannot sleep. His mind, which was so sharp, so clear, so confident before the murder, now becomes his enemy. Turning against him. Replaying the scene over and over. Showing him details he didn't notice in the moment. The way the old woman's eyes widened. The sound of the blood. The innocent sister Lizaveta who walked in and had to die as well. And he cannot stop these images, cannot will them away, cannot use his intelligence to make them disappear. Do you understand what I'm showing you here? This is not a story about whether murder is wrong. Everyone knows murder is wrong. This is a story about what happens when you try to use your intelligence to override your conscience. When you develop sophisticated arguments to justify acting against your own deepest nature. When you convince yourself that you're different, special, exempt from the rules that govern ordinary humans. And then you discover that you were never as extraordinary as you thought. That your theory was garbage. That your intellectual sophistication was just a way of lying to yourself about who you really are. In Siberia, I met men who had killed. Many of them. And what shocked me was not that they were monsters. They weren't. They were human. Fully human. Which was somehow more disturbing than if they had been beasts. And I watched how different men responded to what they had done. Some had killed in rage, in the heat of passion, in circumstances of extreme pressure. And while they carried guilt, it was a guilt they could eventually integrate. They could say, I did this terrible thing. I was pushed beyond my limits. I am not proud of it, but I understand how it happened. And this kind of guilt, while heavy, did not destroy them completely. But there were others. The ones who had killed coldly, deliberately. The ones who had convinced themselves through reasoning that their victim deserved to die, or that the murder served some higher purpose. And these men, they were the ones who could not find peace. Because their guilt was compounded by the recognition that they had betrayed not just another human being but themselves. They had acted against something fundamental in their own nature. And no amount of logic could undo what they had done. No clever arguments could restore what they had broken inside themselves. Raskolnikov experiences this in waves. At first he tries to fight it through reasoning. He goes over his theory again and again. Reminds himself why the murder was justified. Lists all the good he will do with the money. Tells himself that his sickness is just temporary weakness, that he will recover and move forward. But the sickness doesn't fade. It intensifies. And what starts as psychological distress becomes almost physical. He develops a fever. He can barely function. His personality begins to fragment under the pressure. And he finds himself doing irrational things. Confessing to people indirectly. Leaving clues. Almost as if some part of him wants to be caught, wants to be punished, wants the external consequences to match the internal torment. And here's what makes his suffering so precise, so psychologically accurate. He doesn't feel guilty because society disapproves of murder. He feels guilty because he has violated his own nature. There is something in him, something deeper than his theories, deeper than his rational mind, that knows what he did was wrong. Not wrong according to social convention. Not wrong according to religious teaching. But wrong in an absolute sense. Wrong in a way that cannot be reasoned away. And this knowledge, this recognition of his own crime against himself, this is what tears him apart. I need you to understand something about conscience. Because modern people get this wrong. They think conscience is learned, conditioned, programmed into us by parents and society and culture. And yes, the specific content of conscience is shaped by these factors. What you feel guilty about depends partly on what you were taught. But conscience itself, the capacity to feel guilt, the mechanism that makes certain acts feel like self-betrayal, this is built into human nature. This is what makes us human rather than animals. And you cannot eliminate it through education or therapy or philosophical sophistication. You can only suppress it. And suppressing it requires enormous psychological energy. And eventually the suppression fails. And the guilt floods in with a force that can destroy you. Raskolnikov meets a woman named Sonia. A girl forced into prostitution to support her family. Someone who has every reason to be bitter, hardened, cynical. But who has somehow maintained a capacity for love and faith that seems impossible given her circumstances. And when he confesses to her, when he finally tells someone what he has done, she doesn't offer arguments. She doesn't try to analyze his psychology. She doesn't attempt to help him rationalize his guilt away. Instead she tells him that he must suffer. That he must confess publicly. That he must go to Siberia and serve his sentence. And that through this suffering, through accepting it rather than running from it, he might find what she has found. Redemption, transformation, a way to live with what he has done. And at first he rejects this. Because it makes no sense according to his framework. Suffering serves no purpose in his rational system. Confession achieves nothing practical. Punishment is just society's revenge. Why should he voluntarily embrace any of this when his intelligence could help him escape? But here's what he slowly begins to understand, what Sonia knows intuitively, what I learned in Siberia, that guilt cannot be reasoned away. It can only be transformed through a process that involves acknowledging what you did, accepting responsibility fully, and allowing yourself to be changed by the weight of it. Watch what happens to Raskolnikov after the murder. His relationships become impossible. He pushes away his mother and sister who love him. He cannot connect with his friend Razumikin despite the man's genuine affection. He becomes isolated, not because people reject him but because he cannot bear to be seen. Because every interaction feels like lying, like maintaining a false front, like pretending to be someone he is no longer. And this isolation intensifies his suffering. Because humans are not meant to carry guilt alone. We are designed to be seen, known, accepted even in our worst moments. And when we cut ourselves off from this possibility, when we try to manage guilt through secrecy and denial, the guilt becomes unbearable. There's a detective investigating the murder, Porfiry, who understands psychology better than anyone in the novel. And he knows Raskolnikov is guilty. But instead of arresting him immediately, he plays a psychological game. He visits Raskolnikov, engages him in philosophical discussions, subtly indicates that he knows, and then backs away. And this cat-and-mouse interaction is torture for Raskolnikov. But here's the crucial insight: Porfiry is not creating the torture. He's just exposing what's already there. The guilt was destroying Raskolnikov from inside before Porfiry ever appeared. The detective just makes visible what was already happening internally. And this is what people miss about guilt. They think it's something imposed from outside. That if you can avoid detection, avoid social consequences, avoid punishment, then you can escape the guilt. But real guilt, the kind that comes from violating your own nature, this exists independent of whether anyone else knows. This is between you and yourself. And there is no escape through cleverness, through moving to a new city, through reinventing your identity. Because you carry yourself with you. And the knowledge of what you did is always there, waiting in quiet moments, surfacing in dreams, turning every achievement hollow because you know what it's built on. Let me tell you something I discovered in Siberia that became the key to understanding Raskolnikov. I met peasants, simple people without education or sophistication, who had committed crimes and were serving their sentences. And many of them had found a kind of peace. Not happiness, not the absence of regret, but peace. Because they had accepted what they did, acknowledged their guilt fully, and allowed their suffering to transform them. They didn't try to justify their crimes. They didn't develop theories about why they were actually innocent. They simply said, yes, I did this. It was wrong. I am paying the price. And somehow this acceptance freed them to be human again, to love, to hope, to imagine a future beyond their guilt. But I also met intellectuals, educated prisoners who had committed political crimes. And many of them could not find this peace, because their intelligence kept getting in the way. They kept trying to think their way out of guilt, to develop arguments that would prove they were actually right, to maintain their self-image as good people who just happened to do something that looked bad but was actually justified when you understood the full context. And this refusal to simply accept their guilt, this need to be right even when they were wrong, this kept them trapped in a hell of their own making. Raskolnikov eventually confesses. Not because he's caught, he could have escaped detection if he had stayed disciplined. He confesses because the weight becomes unbearable. Because living with the secret is worse than any punishment the state could impose. Because the human soul is not designed to carry certain kinds of guilt alone. And the moment he confesses, something shifts. The psychological torture doesn't disappear immediately. But a process begins. A process that will eventually lead to transformation. Though it will take years. And it will require him to go to Siberia. To suffer. To be broken down and rebuilt. Now here's what I want you to understand about your own life. You might not have committed murder. But if you're feeling guilt that won't go away, guilt that keeps you up at night, guilt that makes success feel hollow and happiness feel fraudulent, then you're experiencing what Raskolnikov experienced. You have violated something in your own nature. Crossed a line that you knew was real. Betrayed yourself in some fundamental way. And no amount of rationalization will make that guilt disappear. No clever arguments will restore your peace. No amount of achievement will cover the wound. And you have a choice. The same choice Raskolnikov faced. You can keep trying to manage the guilt. To suppress it. To distract yourself from it. To build elaborate justifications that prove you were actually right. Or you can do what Raskolnikov eventually did. You can acknowledge what you did. Take full responsibility without excuses. And accept that you need to be transformed by this. That you cannot simply move past it. That redemption requires you to go through something, not around it, not over it, through it. The modern world tells you that guilt is unhealthy. That you should let yourself off the hook. That everyone makes mistakes and you shouldn't beat yourself up. That what matters is your happiness and your mental health. And for small things, for ordinary failures, this might be true. But for the deep things, for the times you genuinely betrayed yourself, betrayed someone who trusted you, acted against your own deepest values, the modern therapeutic approach does not work. because it tries to eliminate guilt without transformation. And guilt that comes from real violation cannot be eliminated. It can only be transformed. Raskolnikov's transformation begins with confession, continues through years of hard labor in Siberia, and culminates in a moment near the end of the novel when he fully accepts his guilt, stops defending himself, stops trying to maintain that he was extraordinary, and recognizes that he is just a man who did something terrible and now must live with what he did. And in this recognition, in this complete surrender of his ego's need to be special, he finds the beginning of redemption. Not because he's punished enough, not because he's suffered enough, but because he's finally told himself the truth. And truth, even terrible truth, is the only foundation on which you can build a real life. Sonia stays with him through all of this, not because she approves of what he did, not because she's trying to save him through her love, but because she understands something about human nature that Raskolnikov's intelligence couldn't grasp. That people are not divided into extraordinary and ordinary. That we are all capable of terrible things and all capable of redemption. That love is not about maintaining your image as a good person but about being willing to be seen in your worst moments and accepting others in theirs. And her presence, her willingness to stay, this gives Raskolnikov something to hold on to when everything else is lost. Here's what I learned from creating Raskolnikov, from living through my own confrontation with guilt after the mock execution, from watching prisoners in Siberia wrestle with what they had done. Conscience is real. It is not social conditioning. It is not psychological weakness. It is the voice of your deepest self telling you that you have betrayed what you are meant to be. And when you hear that voice, you have two choices. You can fight it, suppress it, argue with it, and slowly destroy yourself. Or you can listen to it, accept what it's telling you, and allow yourself to be transformed by the truth of your own guilt. This transformation is not comfortable. It is not quick. It does not leave you feeling good about yourself. But it is the only way back to being human. The only way to restore your capacity for genuine connection. The only way to find peace that doesn't depend on maintaining elaborate lies about who you are. And once you accept this path, once you stop fighting your conscience and start listening to it, you discover that guilt can become something other than torture. It can become the door through which you walk into a more authentic life. So if guilt is eating at you, if you lie awake at night replaying what you did, if success feels empty because you know what you did to achieve it, if you cannot connect with people because you're terrified they'll see who you really are, then you already know what Raskolnikov learned. That you cannot think your way out of guilt. You cannot achieve your way past it. You cannot distract yourself from it permanently. You can only go through it, acknowledge it, accept it, and allow it to change you into someone who will never do that thing again. Not because you're afraid of consequences, but because you understand now what it costs, what it does to your soul, what it means to betray yourself. Raskolnikov's story ends with hope, but not the hope of forgetting. Not the hope of moving past his crime as if it never happened. The hope of becoming someone new. Someone who has been broken and rebuilt. Someone who knows his own darkness and has chosen light anyway. And this is the only kind of hope that matters when you're carrying real guilt. The hope that you can be transformed. That your worst moment does not have to define you forever. That redemption is possible if you're willing to walk through fire to get there. Listen to your conscience. It is trying to save you. Not from punishment. Not from social consequences. But from living a lie. From spending your life pretending to be someone you're not. From dying without ever being truly seen or known. And the path it points to, the path of confession, acceptance, transformation, this is hard. This is painful. This might cost you everything. But it is the only path that leads to peace. And peace, real peace, the kind that survives in the middle of the night when you're alone with yourself. This is worth whatever it costs.